He called her hostile. He said she flailed, that she reached for a weapon, that she threatened his life with a look he swore could kill. In a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and coffee, Officer Blake Connor, uniform pressed, medals shining, lifted his right hand and swore he would tell the truth. The prosecutor nodded along. The gallery leaned forward, and a dozen jurors tried to read the story in his face. When he pointed at the woman in the navy blazer, Asha Bennett, murmurs rippled. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She simply watched. "Your Honor," Officer Connor said, settling into the microphone with the ease of a man who's told a version of this story before. "The defendant was combative from the first second I approached the vehicle. She refused my commands. She reached for her glove box even after I warned her to stop. I feared for my life." Asha's pen tapped silently against a legal pad. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was composed. On the floor beside her, a plain black briefcase. Nothing about her screamed power. That was the point. "In my 15 years, Connor continued, voice warming to its rhythm, "I've never seen someone try so hard to escalate a lawful stop." He glanced at the jury, then back to the judge. "I acted by the book. The defendant did not." Hook. The judge scribbled something. The prosecutor smiled. The bailiff shifted. Everyone seemed to know where this was going. A neat ending in favor of the man in blue. Everyone but Asha. When it was the defense's turn, the public defender, new to this courtroom, folders slightly out of order, stood and swallowed. "Ms. Bennett, can you tell the court what happened?" Asha rose. She spoke like a gentle flame, soft, precise, inevitable. "Yes, I can tell the court exactly what happened. I was driving the speed limit. I pulled over immediately when I saw the lights. I turned off the engine. I put both hands on the wheel and left them there. When the officer asked for my license and registration, I handed them over without comment. When he asked where I was going, I explained that I was returning from a site visit. When he asked how I could afford my neighborhood, I told him that question was inappropriate and unrelated to any traffic violation." The room shifted. Eyes bounced between the witnesses like tennis balls. The public defender tried to keep up, turning pages that were suddenly too thin. The prosecutor stood to object, narrative, but the judge was curious now. "Overruled. I'd like to hear this." Asha nodded. "Officer Connor's account is false. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make sudden movements, didn't threaten him. His claims about my supposed aggression are not just wrong, they're impossible." "Impossible?" the prosecutor said, a little too loud. "Yes," Asha said, calm as a ruler. "Because I document all official interactions according to federal evidence protocols." She let that phrase hang in the air, federal evidence protocols, just long enough to make the room lean in. Then she went quiet. The first 5 minutes had reset the whole room. Conflict framed, stakes placed, the hint of something larger glinting under the surface like metal in the dirt. People listened with their chests now. The prosecutor tried to pivot, to push doubt into the creases of her poise. "Ms. Bennett, are you saying the officer is lying under oath?" "I'm saying," Asha replied, "that facts exist outside anyone's comfort." She sat. The gallery buzzed. Officer Connor wore the expression of a man who believes the audience belongs to him. He had carried rooms like this before. He expected to carry this one too. But then the defense called a witness, a hardware shop owner from the corner where the stop happened. He was nervous at first, hands worrying the brim of his old ball cap until the judge told him gently to set it on the rail. He described what he saw from his storefront. A woman who kept her hands on the wheel, an officer whose tone turned sharp after reading her address, a street security system with a microphone that captured the conversation. "Audio?" the judge asked, leaning forward. "Yes, Your Honor. My cameras have sound." The prosecutor blanched. The defense queued up the clip. The courtroom TV blinked to life. For a moment, only the hum of the system filled the air. Then voices, clear, sharp, poured out. The officer's questions came quick and personal. The woman's voice was calm. No threats. No lunge. No panic. The room seemed to breathe in one long inhale that didn't end. Officer Connor stared straight ahead. When the clip ended, the judge requested to hear it again. Then again. "What about body cam?" the judge asked. "Malfunction," the officer said, almost a whisper. "It happens." Asha took notes without looking up. The pen moved, the line built, the silence pressed. The hook had teeth now. You could feel viewers at home leaning closer to their screens, waiting for the other shoe, the real shoe, the one labeled truth. The defense rested that afternoon with more questions than answers. The judge announced a recess until morning. People spilled out of the courtroom with their favorite theories. Some argued the hardware store audio must be incomplete. Some swore they'd felt a change the minute Asha said federal protocols, like a wind turning before the storm arrives. When Asha got home, she placed her briefcase on the kitchen counter and washed her hands as if rinsing off the day. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from an encrypted thread labeled Oversight Team. Authorization for disclosure approved, at your discretion. She stared at the words. Then she allowed herself a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Choices had consequences. Some consequences taught entire cities how to breathe again. Upstairs, she changed into a hoodie and sat at her desk. The wall above it held framed photos from trainings most people never knew existed, certificates signed by names most people never met. She opened a secure drive. She reviewed chain of custody forms. She cross-checked timestamps across 3 separate recording systems, a private camera, a city traffic cam 2 blocks away, and a concealed recorder that didn't care whether a body cam malfunctioned. All 3 lined up like planets. She paused at one file, a quiet, clean recording from inside the car, collected in adherence with strict rules she could recite in her sleep. She hadn't wanted to use it unless she had to. Tomorrow, she would have to. Before bed, she called her mother. They talked about the mundane things that anchor a person to the world. Groceries, the neighbor's roses, a nephew's school play. Then her mother said the thing that always made Asha see herself at 10 years old. You don't owe them your calm, baby, she said softly. But your calm is your power. I know, Mama. Then do what you came to do. Morning arrived different. The courthouse lines snaked around the steps. A journalist rehearsed into a camera. A case that has the potential to shake municipal confidence. The bailiff's voice cracked as he called everyone back to order. The judge addressed the room. We are here to determine facts. Truth is not a popularity contest. It is a record. He turned to the defense. Counsel. The public defender stood, a steadier hand today. Your Honor, the defense intends to introduce additional evidence, but doing so requires a professional disclosure by my client. We request permission for Ms. Bennett to address the court directly. The judge studied Asha. Proceed. Asha walked to the witness stand with the measured grace of someone who had practiced each step until it no longer felt like movement. She was not hurried. She was not hesitant. She placed one palm on the Bible, spoke the oath, and looked up into 100 waiting eyes. My name is Asha Bennett, she began. For the last 18 months, I have served as a senior inspector with a federal oversight agency assigned to evaluate civil rights compliance within city law enforcement operations. The interaction in question occurred while I was engaged in authorized work. I documented that interaction using approved federal protocols. I have authorization to disclose my identity and relevant evidence to this court. No oxygen in the room. None. A sound like metal buckling came from somewhere near the prosecutor's table. Officer Connor stared at her as if language itself had betrayed him. Asha opened the briefcase. She didn't dramatize the motion. She didn't need to. She produced a leather wallet and handed it to the clerk. The clerk brought it to the judge. The judge examined the credentials, then handed them back. He cleared his throat. Credentials appear to be in order, he said, eyes steady. In the gallery, you could see jaws unclench and clench again. Doubt and belief played a short, brutal chess game across the faces of strangers who suddenly realized they had been watching a prelude, not a play. Ms. Bennett, the judge said, you may present your evidence. She nodded. Your Honor, Exhibit A, corroborated audio from a privately owned security system with uninterrupted capture. Exhibit B, time-synced municipal traffic camera footage of the roadside area, confirming body positions and vehicle doors. Exhibit C, federally collected recording from within my vehicle, approved under internal policy and held under seal until now. She paused. All materials include verifiable hash values and chain of custody logs. The clerk distributed binders. The courtroom television lit again. This time, the playback felt different, like a mirror held to a mirror. In the audio, Asha's voice remained unshaken. In the street cam, her hands stayed visible. In the interior capture, her posture never shifted from cautious compliance. There was no lunch. There was no threat. There was a series of loaded questions about her address and a condescending remark about people like you. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a pattern. When the screens went dark, silence didn't know where to put itself. The judge leaned back, eyes on Officer Connor. Officer, do you wish to amend any part of your testimony? The officer's mouth opened and closed, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time, he looked small in his chair. He toyed with his wedding ring, then laced his fingers together as if they were a lifeline. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, voice struggling to find footing, we were not advised. You were advised to seek the truth, the judge said. You are being given a gift, the chance to recalibrate. The defense didn't gloat. Asha didn't smile. She returned to the table, took up her pen, and resumed what she'd been doing all along, building a record sturdy enough to hold the weight of other people's futures. The hook had become a hinge. The room knew it. If this were a video, this would be the spot where the comments section erupts with, I knew it, instant karma. She kept her calm, respect everyone. But the story wasn't over. It had only reached the moment where truth announced it would not play background music anymore. Near the back, 3 people exchanged looks, faces Asha recognized from past complaint files. A church treasurer in her 70s, a delivery driver in his 30s, a teacher in her 40s, all with dismissed grievances, all familiar with the phrase, insufficient evidence. Today, evidence had a microphone, a camera, and a badge. The judge called a short recess. When he returned, he spoke slowly, as if choosing each word with tweezers. Given what we've seen, the court is concerned about the integrity of prior testimony. I am formally requesting that the district attorney's office confer with federal authorities regarding potential perjury and civil rights violations. Officer Connor stared at the tabletop as if it were a cliff. Asha folded her hands. Such a simple action, folding hands. But in that moment, it felt like the entire room adjusted to her pace. Respect doesn't always have to be demanded to be felt. Sometimes it just arrives when truth does. The city woke up to headlines it pretended not to want. Cop's testimony challenged by federal inspector. Morning radio debated with breathless certainty that the truth must be hiding in some technicality. What even is a federal inspector? A host joked. Like a secret shopper for justice? Laughter flickered across airwaves, the kind that keeps fear at bay. At the courthouse, the temperature of the building had changed. Officers spoke in lower voices. Clerks walked an extra step around Asha's table, respect tinged with curiosity. The public defender whispered, I didn't sleep last night. Asha said, we will give the court structure. Truth needs structure to stand. She'd learned that from a mentor who taught her that facts don't persuade people, stories do. But facts make the story undeniable. The prosecution moved to exclude the interior recording. The judge denied it, noting the authenticated chain of custody and the federal authorization memo. The gallery leaned forward, eager for more blood than the law is designed to spill. Then came the first surprise of the day. An email alert pinged the clerk. A subpoena compliance notice from the municipal IT office confirmed that on the night of the stop, Officer Connor's body camera unit registered a manual toggle off on sequence approximately 5 minutes before the malfunction. The unit had been serviced 2 weeks prior. There were no recorded defects. The prosecutor's face tightened. The defense didn't need to say anything. The document said it all. Someone had taken truth into their own hands and flicked it off like a light switch. The judge invited cross-examination. Asha stood, not to grandstand, but to clarify. Your Honor, may I pose limited questions to the witness about departmental procedure? There was no drama in her tone, but the room braced anyway. She asked simple things. What is your policy for disabling a camera? Under what circumstances can you stop recording? What form must be filed afterward? The answers were limp. They contradicted the department's written guidelines in the clerk's binder. The officer kept saying, to my recollection, and the judge kept writing. And then the emotional beat arrived. Quiet, unexpected, devastating. A woman in the third row stood with trembling hands. Your Honor, I know this is irregular, but may I be heard? The judge hesitated, then nodded cautiously. She introduced herself, Denise Hart, a middle school teacher. A year ago, she said, Officer Connor pulled her over after she left a school board meeting. He asked how she could afford her car. He said, People get bold when they move zip codes. He wrote a report claiming she struck his hand when she reached for her insurance card. The charge ruined a job offer. The case was dismissed when technical issues with his camera erased the end of the stop. She sat down. The gallery's pulse quickened. The courtroom is not a talk show. But sometimes pain finds a microphone anyway. Asha didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew that voice. She had read that file. The judge adjourned early to avoid a stampede of unvetted testimony. Outside, the camera crews were waiting. A reporter called out, "Ms. Bennett, are you trying to take down the entire department?" Asha answered without looking at the lens, "I'm trying to hold up a mirror." That evening, Asha drove to the river. She watched the water move like time, steady, unbothered by theater, uninterested in who deserved what. Her phone buzzed again, a text from someone inside City Hall. "Check your inbox." She opened a secure portal to see a list of civil complaints against Officer Connor. 43 entries over 4 years, a constellation of pain flattened and stamped closed. Attached were internal memos recommending corrective counseling in lieu of discipline, citing his exemplary service record and strong community ties. The memos were signed by supervisors who had since been promoted. She read until the sun dipped. She thought of her mother's voice. "Your calm is your power." Calm didn't mean numb. Calm was a choice, to unspool rage into method. By the next morning, the bench had invited a representative from Internal Affairs to testify about policy compliance. The representative arrived with tense politeness, clutching a thin folder that looked far too small for the weight of the moment. Under oath, he admitted that informal discretion sometimes trumped written policy when it came to camera discipline. The judge's pen stopped moving. "Informal discretion," he repeated. "Words matter." Those two had just buried a carnival of malfunctions. Asha's reveal, her badge, her chain of custody, her unbroken posture, had become a lighthouse. People who had drifted in shame now moved toward it. A retired deacon approached the defense table during lunch and slid a USB drive across with shaking fingers. "Church lot. Last September. I think you'll want it," he whispered. In the footage, an officer's tone curdles after seeing a parishioner's address. The pattern wrote itself. That afternoon, while the prosecutor scrambled to remap a case built on sand, the judge asked a question that emptied the air. "Ms. Bennett, given your role, are there broader implications we should be aware of?" Asha met his gaze. "There may be," she said carefully. "But this is not about spectacle. It's about accountability. The court determines guilt or innocence today. Oversight determines whether anyone gets to lie in this room tomorrow." When court adjourned, a teenager waited by the steps, hands stuffed in the pockets of a hoodie. "Ma'am," he said, voice barely there. "Thank you for making the room listen." She wanted to say something equally simple back. "You deserve a world that listens without a badge." Instead, she nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I see you." Because respect isn't always a speech. Sometimes it's eye contact and a promise. As night fell, the city shifted from gossip to reckoning. Neighborhood group chats filled with debate. A union hall scheduled an emergency meeting. A civil rights clinic posted, "Know Your Rights," infographics in 3 languages. The story had vaulted beyond a single stop. It had become a mirror too big to tuck into a drawer. In her apartment, Asha stared at her reflection. "You don't owe them your calm, baby. But your calm is your power." Tomorrow, there would be a motion to dismiss. Tomorrow, there would be a motion to refer. Tomorrow, there would be a new witness whose testimony would make the room gasp. She placed her palm flat against the cool glass and made a simple promise to herself. Finish what you started. Word travels in courthouses the way rain travels down glass. It finds every path. By 9 a.m., the pews were packed not just with gawkers, but with lives. A nurse who lost a promotion after a false resisting charge. A delivery driver whose dash cam was inexplicably unreadable. A grandmother who learned the hard way that disorderly conduct can mean asking why. The district attorney's office, suddenly very awake, asked for a continuance to evaluate newly surfaced materials. The judge granted an hour. In that hour, the public defender's inbox filled with community footage, time-stamped, GPS tagged, honest in the way computers can be. Asha triaged like a surgeon. Evidence isn't a flood. It's a river that needs banks or it drowns everything. When court resumed, The defense called 2 witnesses whose stories were not identical, but rhymed. Mrs. Green, 74, testified about being stopped after church and asked how she managed to live in the new condos. She had a recording too, a choir rehearsal mic accidentally left on near the lot. In the audio, the officer's tone shifted at the mention of her building. Then came the report. Belligerent. She did not sound belligerent. She sounded like someone's favorite aunt asking for mercy with her eyebrows. Next, Jamal Price, a warehouse supervisor, described a traffic stop that became a disorderly charge after he asked why his registration hadn't pulled up in the system. He had a dashcam. The feed captured his hands at 10 and 2 the entire time. The officer's narrative in the report read like fiction written by someone who'd never met him. The jury watched, then looked at the officer's face and learned what betrayal looks like when it realizes it's been recognized. The prosecutor tried to patch holes with phrases like context and split-second judgments. The words cracked on impact with the screens. There is a difference between human error and design disregard. One forgives, the other reforms. Then the moral heartbeat thudded into the center of the room. A character witness for Asha, a city compliance director, testified to her integrity without theatrics. She is the person you send when a department says, "We did nothing wrong," and you need to know whether that sentence is truth or tradition. The line landed softly, then echoed. Officer Connor's attorney motioned to strike most of the new evidence as prejudicial. The judge denied, noting the relevance to credibility. He glanced at the officer again, voice neutral but heavy. Perjury does not care for your resume. After lunch, Asha presented a short, brutal demonstration of how chain of custody works when it is respected. 3 sources, 3 timestamps, 3 hashes. She explained it like a teacher who wants her students to leave with something they can hold. The jury leaned in, not because they were computer experts, but because clarity is an act of kindness in a room that so often drowns in jargon. The day ended not with fireworks, but with a shape taking form. A case that began as he said, she said, had become he said, evidence disagreed. The judge announced that the court would entertain motions regarding referral to federal authorities. The prosecutor's jaw clenched. The defense said, "We so move." Asha packed her briefcase with the same care she'd unpacked reality. As she walked out, a hush followed like a tide. Not fear. Not awe. Something closer to relief. People have a right to see the moment when a lie loses its job. The 4th morning felt like the moment in a long storm when the thunderheads separate and you can finally see how big they are. The courtroom swelled with press. The court ruled on a key motion. Evidence admitted. Defense allowed to present federal authorization. The jury instructed that credibility is a fact like any other and must be weighed against the record, not reputation. Then came the confrontation that would loop in highlight reels. Asha stood to cross-examine. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She held the officer's reports in one hand and a simple clicker in the other to advance synchronized visuals. Side by side, report language versus actual footage. "Mr. Connor," she said, "you wrote, the subject repeatedly reached toward the glove compartment. Please indicate the frame in which that occurs." Click. Footage showed motionless hands. He stared. Silence yawned. "You wrote, the subject shouted obscenities. Please indicate the time code." Click. The only raised voice belonged to him. He swallowed. "You wrote, the camera malfunctioned. Please state the malfunction code and the follow-up form number you filed." Click. On screen. Maintenance logs with no code, no form. When he attempted, finally, to lash out, "Who do you think you are?" She answered with the same 5 words that had changed the trial. "A federal inspector with authorization." The jury didn't applaud. Courtrooms don't applaud. But you could feel the room exhale a wordless yes. Then she did something unexpected. She switched the screen to a montage of community footage, blurred faces where appropriate, clean audio where allowed, overlaid with policy excerpts. What should happen? What did happen? She didn't editorialize. She curated. Story did the rest. The officer broke. Not dramatically. Not with sobs. With a long, defeated sigh that sounded like a door unlocking in an empty house. "I shouldn't have said what I said," he murmured. "I shouldn't have turned the unit off." He did not say why. He did not say who told him. He just surrendered the lie that had kept him upright. The judge called a recess. In chambers, he conferred with the district attorney and a U.S. attorney's liaison who had arrived without fanfare and took a back row seat. The liaison wore no badge on her lapel. She did not need one. She carried the kind of silence that makes other people measure their sentences. Back in open court, the judge announced that the matter would be referred to federal authorities for review of possible perjury and civil rights violations. The jury was instructed to consider only the charges against Asha: obstructing, resisting, reckless driving. The prosecutor stood, eyes dimmed, and dismissed each count in turn. "In the interest of justice," he said, and for once, the phrase meant what it pretended to mean. In the gallery, someone cried quietly, not because a TV moment had landed, because a weight had. Asha didn't smile. Justice is a staircase. One step doesn't earn a celebration that belongs to the whole flight. Outside, microphones clustered. "What's your message to the public?" someone asked. "Respect everyone," she said. And respect is not a feeling. It's a habit. Accountability rarely arrives as a parade. It shows up with forms and audits, with memos and training logs, with new checklists that make the old way impossible. Within 2 weeks, the department announced interim policies. No manual camera disables except in medical privacy situations. Automatic uploads at the end of every shift. Disciplinary matrices tied to objective evidence gaps. Internal Affairs was reassigned to a joint city-county panel for 6 months. The union filed a grievance. The city attorney quietly began reviewing settlement exposure like a weatherman studying a line of storms. Officer Connor was placed on leave pending investigation. Then the leave turned indefinite. Then the grand jury convened. The charges, if they came, wouldn't be because a video went viral. They would be because a record, built brick by verified brick, could carry the weight of a courtroom. At a community forum, Asha sat on a folding chair near the back as residents took the microphone. "I just want to walk my dog without proving I live on my own block," one woman said. "I don't want my son to practice rehearsed movements in the mirror," a father added. Asha listened without inserting herself. She knew the work was bigger than a single trial. She also knew that one honest trial can rewire how a city tells the story of who it is. The teacher, Denise, approached afterward. "I got the job back," she said, eyes bright with the kind of relief that feels like oxygen after too long underwater. They apologized. The word tasted unfamiliar to both of them. Apology is not repair. But sometimes it is a door that opens to a hallway where repair waits. A month later, federal charging documents were unsealed. False statements, obstruction, deprivation of rights under color of law. 5 other officers were quietly reassigned amid review of their cases. The U.S. Attorney's press conference was brief. No chest beating. Just a sentence that belonged on a poster in every academy classroom. Truth is the first duty of the badge. The department signed onto a monitoring agreement. Quarterly audits, community oversight board, randomized review of stops in discretionary zones. A complaint intake process that started with listening instead of suspicion. None of it was glamorous. All of it was gospel. Culture eats policy for breakfast, people say. But policy feeds culture 3 meals a day until the appetite changes. Asha visited her mother. On the coffee table, a newspaper was folded to a column that called her unyielding but fair. Her mother snorted. "They don't know the half of it." They laughed. Then they didn't. In the quiet that followed, Asha allowed herself to feel something she had kept in a steel drawer all month. Ache. The ache that comes from shouldering stories that never should have had to happen. "You did what you came to do," her mother said, that old melody back in the room. "And you did it without letting them steal your dignity." "I'm tired," Asha admitted. "Rest," her mother answered. "Then teach the next one to do it too." 6 months later, the city didn't look different on a postcard. But inside the bones of its institutions, something had shifted. Patrol cars downloaded automatically at midnight. Supervisors reviewed a random 10% of stops every week. Community liaisons rode along on Friday nights, not to play gotcha, but to watch the subtle art of respect in both directions. Complaints dropped, not because people gave up, but because fewer sparks were landing in dry grass. Officer Connor stood in a federal courtroom in a suit that didn't fit his shoulders like a uniform did. He pled to lying under oath and disabling a recording device during an official encounter. He apologized. Some will say apologies don't matter. Sometimes they do. Not as erasers. Erasers are for pencil marks. not people, but as acknowledgments that the truth outranks you. In the same week, the city announced funding for de-escalation training built around authentic community scenarios. It wasn't window dressing. In one session, a rookie learned how to accept a citizen's documentation without losing authority, and a citizen learned how to feel seen without surrendering dignity. The facilitator paused the scene and asked the most important question: what would respect look like if we weren't afraid? People answered from the deepest wells they had. Asha spoke at a regional conference, not with fireworks, but with process. She showed how evidence had to be gathered before the headline, how calm is not complicity but control, how instant karma is only instant because someone was patient in the dark a long time ago. She ended with a story about her mother, and a line that belongs in anyone's private creed. Respect is not what you give to the powerful. Respect is what you owe to the truth. After her talk, a young officer approached, badge newly minted, eyes clear. "Ma'am," he said, "I joined to do it right. Thank you for making right easier to see." Asha shook his hand. "You will be someone's first impression of the law," she said. "Make it a story they would tell their children with pride." That evening, she walked the river again. The city hummed. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell then fell silent. Somewhere, a teacher who almost quit changed her lesson plan to include a unit on the roots of trust. Somewhere, a grandmother walked her block without rehearsing her ID speech in her head. Somewhere, a teenager filmed a stop and never had to post it. At home, Asha placed her briefcase in the closet and closed the door with intention. She wasn't retiring. She was reminding herself that the job and the self are neighbors, not roommates. On her refrigerator, a post-it note in her mother's handwriting waited with a smile inside it. Your calm is your power. Your power is your kindness with a spine. The phone buzzed one more time. A new assignment. A new city with an old story. She read the summary. She breathed once, deep and deliberate. "Let's begin," she said to no one and to everyone. Because the moral of this tale is not that a cop fell and a woman rose. It's that a room learned to love the record more than the rumor. It's that respect, humility, resilience, and kindness aren't soft. They are steel. It's that justice is slow, until the moment patience tips into consequence and the world calls it instant. So remember the headline that pulled people in and the reversal that kept them watching. A cop lied about a black woman in court, until the black woman showed she was a government inspector with receipts, restraint, and a resolve that could rebuild a house out of splinters. Respect everyone. Don't judge what you haven't measured. And never mistake quiet for powerless.